All right, I see that all our speakers are here right now. So I'm going to give it 2 minutes and then we'll get started. We're just going to wait for a few more people to join us and then we can start in 2 minutes. In the meantime, I would like to thank One Nation Radio for hosting this important space. This session is part of a series dedicated to exploring the root causes of the ongoing conflict in DRC in Eastern DRC and how we can move towards lasting peace and reconciliation. And the theme of today's discussion is addressing the root causes of conflict in Eastern DRC, facing the truth. Before I proceed, I just want to share a few housekeeping points for today's space. Today's conversation will run for 2 hours. For the first hour and a half, we will hear from our esteemed panelists, and then the last 30 minutes will be dedicated to a Q&A session. Please note that we will not be revisiting the question of whether Congolese Tutsis or Banyamulenge are Congolese. This issue was addressed in the previous discussion, and you can catch up on that by visiting One Nation's Radio's account. It should be on their page. If you need more resources or information on this topic, feel free to reach out to me privately or any of the speakers for that matter, and they will be happy to provide those resources for you. Okay. Before we dive deeper into today's conversation, I'm going to give you a brief introduction on the speakers, and I also want to introduce One Nation Radio formally, the platform that's hosting this important discussion. One Nation Radio is a global platform that amplifies the voices of the Rwandan diaspora. It was founded in 2013 with the goal of bridging the communication gap between the diaspora and the motherland. Its mission extends beyond simply connecting people. One Nation Radio plays a critical role in fostering unity, promoting dialogue, and ensuring that the voices of marginalized communities are heard. In doing so, it challenges misinformation and brings to light the stories of those directly impacted by the crisis in the Great Lakes region, including the ongoing struggles in Eastern DRC. Today's conversation is part of a series that One Nation Radio is hosting to shed light on critical issues affecting the region. As we engage with our distinguished panelists, we will not only be discussing the present conflict, but also working towards a collective vision of healing and justice, key values that One Nation Radio stands by in its mission to promote peace and reconciliation. Now, as we embark on this vital conversation, let me introduce our distinguished panelists in no particular order. Also, can anybody in the space right now react with some sort of emoji to know that you guys can hear me? Because this is not a video conference. It's hard to know if people are okay. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Our first speaker is George Budagu Makoko, an activist and advocate for peace and reconciliation in the DRC, based in the United States. He's a passionate leader in the diaspora working to amplify the voices of those in Eastern DRC, particularly survivors of genocide and marginalized communities. His advocacy for peace is rooted in his personal experience of loss and displacement, and his work focuses on promoting justice, reconciliation, and a path forward for the people in the DRC. Next, we have Honorable Dr. Fred Mukasa, a vice president of the Democratic Party of Uganda and a legal expert with vast experience in East African politics. As a former member of the East African Legislative Assembly, Dr. Mbide brings a unique perspective on Uganda's role in regional stability and the challenges faced by neighboring countries in addressing the conflict in Eastern DRC. His insights into regional diplomacy and political will shed light on how collaboration amongst East African nations can pave the way for lasting peace. Finally, we're joined by Dr. Alex Mbuka, a political analyst specializing in conflict dynamics and security issues in the Great Lakes region of Africa. Dr. Mbuka will bring his expertise to the discussion on the geopolitical interests and resources competition that shape the conflict in Eastern DRC. He will also address the governance issues in the region and explore how international and regional frameworks can work together to foster peace and stability. Together, these speakers will bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to our conversation. We'll explore the root causes of the conflict in Eastern DRC, examine the role of truth telling in healing and reconciliation, and discuss actionable pathways towards lasting peace. So for the speakers today, the format is I have questions specifically for each speaker. Once I give you your question, you may answer it. And if any of the speakers want to add to what the panelist said, feel free to unmute your mic and chime in on the conversation, and then I will redirect a specific question to you as well. That's going to be the format of our conversation today. And for our listeners, note down your questions and we will address them the last 30 minutes of the space. So today, let's begin by hearing from George. George is an advocate for peace and reconciliation. Can you share your thoughts on the importance of truth in the process of healing, especially in a region that has been so deeply affected by violence and trauma? How do you think communities both in the diaspora and the DRC can work together to bring about healing through truth and reconciliation?
Yeah, thank you, Grace, and also for all the panelists and all the listeners who are here today. I think it's very important that we focus on discussing the root causes of the conflict in DRC in general, but also in particular the eastern part of the Congo. This is a great privilege to be part of this team of panelists and experts on the issues of Democratic Republic of the Congo. To your question, I think one of the ways that we can do as diaspora to kind of promote peace and reconciliation in Democratic Republic of the Congo in general, but also in the eastern part of it, we, the diaspora, need to understand the critical role that we can play in peace efforts and by providing all kinds of resources. First, we can provide financial resources and promoting the reconciliation platforms and also any initiatives that is taking place in Congo that try to bring people together. As you can understand, the conflict has been going on for decades, and what it does is that it kind of completely destroys the tissues of the society. And one of the ways of starting rebuilding or reconciling is making sure that people are getting together and talking about the issues they face, and but also knowing that nobody wins in times of war. Everybody loses, and when we lose, we all grieve, and when we grieve, and the conflict intensify rather than de-escalating. So the diaspora can play a significant role in terms of providing financial and intellectual and diplomatic resources to support local initiatives. The other thing they can do, they can go beyond just sending money back home, but we can also engage in a knowledge transfer and leveraging expertise in conflict resolution, governance, and also economic development. Advocacy through international platforms like we're doing here, whether in the United States, in Europe, and elsewhere in Africa, and to just kind of amplify the local voices and often ignore which are often ignored in policy in all policy discussions. So my biggest advocate and also my biggest uh, uh, ask is that we get to support one another in organizing platforms that discuss about the root causes of the issue and trying to understand the baseline, and from there we can start growing and getting out of the conflict and moving into space where we communicate, we understand each other, but also we kind of forge or put together a framework of reconciliation and peace. So I can go on, but I think that's just a simplified way of responding to your question, Grace. Back to you.
Thank you, George. And I just want to remind our speakers that if you would like to add to what your fellow panelists are sharing, feel free to unmute yourself, and you can um, add to their points, or you can also just bring it up when it's your turn to speak as well. So if nobody has anything to add to that, I will continue. I just want us to know that it's important to understand that healing can create the conditions for peace. And when people are given the space to speak their truth, to name their trauma, and to have their suffering acknowledged, they begin to heal. And it's from that healing that peace can eventually be built. But without truth, healing is stunted, and without truth, there can be no justice. And without justice, peace remains out of reach for everyone. So, with that in mind, we now turn our attention to how global and regional powers influence the conflict landscape in Eastern DRC, especially in terms of their geopolitical interests. Dr. Alex Muka, you've analyzed the role of these powers, particularly around mineral resources. How do these external factors complicate or potentially aid peace efforts, and what is the path to forward from a governance and geopolitical perspective? And you were also just in the region as well, so feel free to share on that as well.
Oh, hi, Grace. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, everyone, for joining this discussion. Where do I start? It's a big question. um, DRC is huge, huge country. Is the size of the whole Western Europe. It is really a continent. It's the second largest country in Africa now, since Sudan became two countries. Algeria now becoming number one. So DRC has always been a hub of interest, international actors' interest. From 1960s, it was really a hub of the Cold War politics. When I talk about Cold War politics, we're talking about the two powerful countries, so powerful world, former Soviet Union and America. This was a time of capitalism versus communism. DRC was literally the African arms of that politics. As you probably may remember, the UN has deployed troops in 1960s, and these troops were not impartial, but acted toward against the DRC interest. Hence, assassination of the first elected, first prime minister. I'm just giving you a little bit synopsis of that question of interest, and how it does really impact on conflict resolution. Um, so the Western powers have really supported Mobutu for 32 years, which was a dictatorship, because he was really almost kind of a police for them. DRC was a kind of a huge interest in terms of security, international security. There was a war around in Angola, which was somehow aligned with the former Soviet Union. I will zoom to current situation. Really, 1998, the Western powers again came up with a resolution to send a largest intervention of UN troops, which was one of the most expensive, still one of the most expensive. They used to spend 1.5 billion a year, but has failed to bring peace. And in fact, actually, ironically, during that time, 130 armed groups proliferated. Now you're talking about between 130 to 200. So I'm just giving you a little bit of background to how DRC has always been an interest, a potential wealth, potential natural resources, or potential economic hub of the world. That's really kind of a influence on what sort of positions those who can bring lasting solutions to kind of align with the DRC, even when is in a mess and has its own responsibility to address. I think that's really one of the biggest issue on where the positions are. The DRC is the future of the world in terms of some of the minerals there, and because of a weak governance, It isn't the only country that has minerals. Australia has minerals, but it's already set. Australia governance is established. So there's no any country such as India or Soviet Union would be insecure. Sorry, or Russia would be insecure, or where DRC would be tomorrow. And what if DRC has something that could be a threat to our interest? So because of a very unpredictable type of governance in the DRC, that makes the game of international actors becoming complicated. How do they align with the DRC? Who is actually taking the DRC? If you look at studies that are done on DRC, they're often really around looking at what is China doing in the DRC. What is Russia doing in the DRC? It's almost kind of like a in it's like a farmers really trying to just be there, look after the farm, not producing anything, but to make sure that no one else is taking the farm. So in terms of really conflicts, that become really complicated. So DRC become a place where regional and international actors, collides in terms of their future interests, in terms of who else is going to be acting in DRC. So in terms of regional powers, both have political interests, but as blocks, but economic interests as individual country. That is really, really, really complicated. What I'm trying to say here, for example, East African Community and SADC, the as individual countries, they have some interest in Kenya has interest in DRC with some businesses, banking especially. Um, but it is part of East African community as well, and those two interests become really become kind of a conflict. Recently, East African community has intervened in DRC, but the problem was DRC, East African community was divided. Tanzania being also part of SADC, Burundi being involved in DRC war under bilateral relationship. So Tanzania became really in difficult position. It is deploying its troops as a part of SADC, but sometimes has refused to deploy troops as part of East African community. And yet, East African community, they are really much more legitimate group to intervene in the DRC. Burundi, as member of East African community and seeking sympathy of SADC, complicated everything because it was acting as part of the East African community and also acting in a bilateral context. Rwanda is often isolated from deciding on the DRC as part of the East African community. It has its own grievances in terms of security by living next to the DRC, and those grievances are legitimate based on five claims, five threats made by the DRC president and wanting to remove a regime in Kigali. So it leaves really few countries in region without conflict of interest. So this dynamics has created a situation where no single power, either regional or international, is really bringing lasting peace. But what they all share in common is the fact that none of these regional power or single countries really try to understand the underlying root of conflict, which is politics of identity, the manipulations and the instrumentalization of politics of identity for political gain, for accessing power, for maintaining power. That's the logic in the DRC. You have to show how much you hate a certain group of people so that you can be able to be popular. And such weakness of institutions. It really, I often say that in DRC, governor, les gouvernants, so which is a really governance actors, they are themselves in conflict of the state. The because of our individuals' ambitions, individual aspirations, they tend to act against the state by killing their own people, by arming armed groups, spending money to arm armed groups. Those armed groups will kill people, and people are Congolese, or turning people against one another through an ideology of genocide. For example, we don't want this kind of people. I could go on maybe under other questions, really to look at interests of each country. For example, why Burundi is involved, why DRC is in war with Rwanda, why SADC was involved, and why South Africa is involved. So I could go on later, but let me stop there. And I've given kind of like a vague or general response to your question, but I can be more specific later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alex. We'll come back to that. We'll revisit what you said. I think there were so many key points, and I'm sure the audience is also very curious about some stuff that you shared. And, like you mentioned, in 1998, the UN deployed peacekeeping forces in the DRC, but despite their intervention, peace remained elusive. And the conflict deepened with over 130 armed groups emerging. And this contributed to a prolonged crisis. And I think it's also important to recognize that the DRC has potential to become an economic powerhouse for the world, like you mentioned, given its vast resources and strategic position. And, however, the persistent instability has prevented the country from fully harnessing this potential, and much of the world's attention on the DRC is shaped by competing geopolitical interests. And this creates a complex web of challenges for lasting solutions, especially when neighboring countries and global powers get involved. One significant issue is that you mentioned is the politicization of identity, where political actors manipulate ethnic or national identities to gain power and access to resources. And this dynamic makes the tension worse, with some powers using identity politics to further their own agendas. So I will redirect the next question to Dr. Mbide, given Uganda's proximity to the DRC and its involvement in regional dynamics. How can we break the cycle of political manipulation based on ethnic or national identity? And how can we ensure that external actors, especially those in East Africa and beyond, stop using these issues for political gain and instead work genuinely towards stability and peace in the DRC? And what role do you think Uganda and its neighbors play in creating an environment where the politics of identity are set aside for the greater good of regional and global stability?
Thank you very much, Madam Gracia. First of all, I'll take this opportunity to thank the organizers. I cannot take it for granted that I have been invited to also make some contribution. I am extremely happy because these are areas where, of course, a lot of interest I bear. One professor friend of mine once said that any text without context is a pretext. So I will definitely place context wherever I am stating, and succinctly, it is not intended to injure anybody's sensibilities, but to definitely lay the truth to the extent that then that is where the solution will lie for a better and permanent entente and the proper peace for DRC to exist. I equally associate myself with the submissions of my first two colleagues. They are well placed. I have got substantial disagreement. But before I do that, let me actually tell the people, the listeners, there is a very grave misunderstanding, particularly by the external actors. And I'm talking of intergovernmental, particularly the East African Community, SADC, then the United Nations, and then Europe. I think there is a very concrete misunderstanding between what the problem actually is in the DRC and what actually they also believe is the problem. To most of the external actors, the problem are the fighting forces of M23 and probably the perceived assistance they obtain from anywhere. Now, that is not the problem. There are people in the DRC, Congolese, that believe the operation of M23 is actually a solution. So the question should be, what problem? Now, before you engage in the establishment of particularly why somebody would pick up arms and fight, you will never solve a problem by simply thinking that peace is just the absence of war. Now, that has been a mistake that has definitely culminated into several decisions that, in my opinion, I disagree with. For as long as they choreograph their own brains into wanting to stop the operations of M23. They begin with the ceasefire and end with the ceasefire. Now, once that is the objective reason that make it a logical necessity for you to sit and deliberate, then you have completely failed from the start in terms of trying to solve the problems in Congo. Why? It is the fear of what will happen tomorrow that makes the tortoise move with its own house. So the M23 and the other fighting forces, by the way, in Congo are intended to be houses by Congolese, except obviously the other entities that exist in Congo, like FDLR, that in my opinion, of course, I can only accept that the SADC established, I think, a more, for the first time, the SADC EAC meeting, I think, resolved well when they established, of course, a mechanism that would have to act their own. So, Uganda, the Congo problem is a regionalized problem. One professor once espoused that they espoused what we call the thy neighbor syndrome. Now, that thy neighbor syndrome presupposes that instability in a neighboring country subtends exactly in proper dimensions the kind of economic and other effects to other neighbors, as if the instability is buttressed and located in those other countries themselves. So now that calls for the interventions by all neighbors, because instability at your neighbor's doorstep is proper instability in your own, as if it were definitely established in your own countries. So in my opinion, of course, that calls for proper operations by the Republic of Uganda, and clearly point to the fact that Uganda, as a neighbor, pursuant to the thy neighbor syndrome, needs and obviously has intended to definitely also act on the instabilities in Eastern Congo. Uganda has made interventions. Of course, from 2nd to September last year, you know of the meetings that have been held to establish a significant joint committee decisions in Goma. Of course, developing a comprehensive roadmap for the affirmation of the 817 kilometers of the shared Uganda-DRC border. You know that, of course, now the Democratic Republic of Congo is I think, a country. It is like, which is being run to the extent that it looks like an abandoned flower field. It is full of flowers. It is very nice. It can establish a lot of scenery. But it sounds and looks abandoned. And it is failing to address the things for which others must address, to the extent then that it develops, of course, fever when others are beginning to address it the same way. You can imagine that only 44 kilometers have so far been affirmed of the border between Congo and Uganda, particularly the Sarabwe and the Bwindi, and of course the boundary and non-boundary markets have not been ascertained as such. So you know that there is a lot of work. Congo is still at commencement stage. It has existed as an independent country for quite some time, but it looks like there is a lot of effort that needs to be done for purposes that the people in Congo can live peacefully. So that is where obviously Uganda is of course its efforts are also equally buttressed. Also, Uganda, as part of the East African Committee, I think has been a protagonist in also trying to push forward in establishing lasting peace for the people of Congo, DRC, and particularly, of course, our participation in the Nairobi, and of course, the motion that led now to the establishment of the joint EAC SADC meeting. Uh, then the Uganda forces also have had to do some part of their own capture of the capital of Ituri, Bunia, because you see, interventions are supposed to be done. They are critical solutions that are required, that cannot wait for timelines established by meetings of all of the external actors. And this is something that Uganda and other countries, of course, surrounding the Congo DRC, cannot wait to actually be flagged off to entertain. They must only enter and explain the reasons for which such entries were done. I think that is practically what you needed me to have entertained. Of course, we have got a history of participation in 1996, 97, 98, 2003, and now actively today, Uganda needs to participate as it ought to have participated, to the extent then that the thy neighbor syndrome also is guarded against when it comes to the territories of Uganda.
Thank you so much for your answer. And for the next one, I want to address this question to all three speakers, because the real challenge, however, is not just identifying, as I heard two speakers mention this, armed groups, or identifying why these armed groups form, but understanding how the operations within these groups can be dismantled. So proper operation in the form of security, governance, and social support are very critical in addressing the root causes of this conflict. And you talked about efforts being made through interventions and diplomatic efforts like the Nairobi and SADC meetings, which of the much of the
Yeah.
critical work still lies ahead, right? And it's urgent. And the DRC, despite its potential, remains at the commencement stage of true peace building, building the nation, and reconciliation overall. So interventions and discussions have been done time and time again, but the solutions needed are urgent and cannot wait. So for all the speakers, in your experience being an East African, so in terms of East African regional politics, how can we accelerate the momentum for these critical solutions and avoid pitfalls of past interventions that you have seen? And what role can regional bodies like the East African Community or SADC and even the African Union play in ensuring that peace building efforts are not just reactive but proactive, and more importantly, active? So feel free to, I know I asked like three questions in one for that one. So whatever you want to chime in for that one, you can share with the audience. Or if you want to tackle the whole three, you can go ahead. So this is for all the speakers, and we'll start with um, Dr. Mbita, if you want to go first, or I can pass it to Mbuka because you just got on. I don't want to ambush you. We can give it to Dr. Alex, and then George can answer it, and then you can go last. Okay, Dr. Alex, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Grace. All fascinating questions. I really start by giving a very kind of obvious answer. The DRC conflict, I've always argued in my writings that is homegrown. The times, the period where there were coups and interference of international actors has passed. Yes, of course, the hegemonic powers still play a huge role. But there are now moment we're living the best time of navigating various complexities of interference. It is up to a country and its own governance approach to create the right environment and conditions for peace to emerge. So number one responsibility in the block of we're talking about is for the DRC. DRC has a responsibility to create a governance that provide or ensure authority, security for all in equitable way. By this, what I mean is really regulating uh, positive relationships between its communities, and really addressing this uh, culture of politics of identity. And by this is the historical. It has started from 60s, where the central government and the Kinshasa level uh, try to fuel conflict by turning one community against one another. So the central government itself has a responsibility to create governance that regulates positive relationship between the communities. Cohesions between communities, it is responsibility of the country. Today, if the DRC is still kind of labeled as a failed state, is because it has not capacity to ensure security for all its citizens. And when we talk about territorial integrity, it really is the responsibility of the country to safeguard or provide the security at all its borders. In international relations, every neighboring country is a potential enemy. It's up to you to assure security and end endemic corruptions that really provide a space to have a weak army, weak institutions, corruptions, and when the government fails, what it does is to use or play political expediency, where you kind of are playing populism to be able to stay in power. In terms of geopolitics or regional responsibilities, um, Congo, this regional groups have interests to address conflict, to support the DRC to address the conflict, because East African community, for example, integration of East African community cannot succeed to its potential without freedom of its people in all the countries. Um, for example, just to take an example of hate speech in Congo against Tutsi people, a hatred ideology that's based on physical futures. This really means that people such as the Maasai or Kikuyu or Dinkas or Banyankole or I don't know, or Toros people in Bunyoro, they cannot trade freely in Kinshasa because they look a certain way. Burundian Tutsis cannot trade freely in Kinshasa because they would be lynched or eaten. This is really a simple reasons that East African community has really a interest to support DRC to find the peace. Same as the SADC, same as the international power. The peaceful Congo is really much more better equipped to engage in international relationship in the international relation arena, or in international trades. So what I see is that many measures, many solutions that have been brought to find the solutions in the DRC are not are really kind of are not based on understanding the underlying causes of conflict. So, for example, with what's going on with M23 today, um, East African community was kind of chosen as playing a key role in terms of really understanding what has been going on. SADC has very little understanding of what has been going on in terms of why this war, why these armed groups, the 250 armed groups, between 130 to 250 armed groups, why are there? Why Codeco? Why ADF? Why all these groups that have been operating there? So, joining forces with MONUSCO, which has been there since 1998, and to kind of really address the root cause and not babysit the DRC, not please the DRC, our central government. By engaging in such a game, what you're doing, you're literally perpetuating the conflict that have been there for so long time, which is so simple. Literally imposing or imposing security, and we have an example of Rwanda after genocide, 1994. They have come up from recipient of international troops, UN troops, MINUAR, which was there. They didn't kick them out. Gradually, themselves, they had to leave because they were realizing that institutions are really building up, and the country was capable to support itself. To support itself, and then that should have been the case for DRC. The fact that MONUSCO has never left by itself is because the governance institutions are not strong, and they know that, and they do like that. So really, it is up to really those power to engage with the DRC, and so that they can get to the political will to tackle the multiple armed groups that terrorize the whole Eastern Congo. Um, I think the other thing is really to look at to merge interests between all these countries. Each country has their own interest. Burundi, for example, which we've been talking about, has its motivations really kind of stems from regional genocide ideology. Following the 1990s conflict in Burundi, there have been so many Burundians who fled to the DRC, same as Rwanda in 1994, and there have been an ideology that developed since that time around a mythical ideas of Bantu Nilotic political polarizations. And this is a myth used by political leaders in DRC. Say that somehow this mythical ideas, um, no knowing that actually is rooted from colonial authorities, the colonial powers, colonial scholars, racist studies. There's no such a thing as a Bantu, as a group, as a people share same DNA. There's no such a thing. Bantu is the classifications of languages, and same as in Nilotics. So in such a context, Kinyarwanda is also a Bantu language. Therefore, people speaking in Rwanda are also Bantu in sense of language. There is no such a thing as Nilotics. There's no such a thing as Hamitics. All those are imported concepts that became a language of conflict in DRC. So Burundi has kind of incorporated these narratives of joining Tshisekedi to fight the Nilotics, to fight Hima and Tutsi Empire. And that is the motivation for them. And the second motivation for them is around economic stability in Burundi. Because Burundi is struggling, they became almost like mercenaries in the DRC, trying to, be paid to fight the war. And the third big motivation for them is, of course, security. Now that they've been fighting M23, they are afraid that if we've been fighting this group and now is controlling many cities, the next is going to be Bujumbura, and the regime will be moved. So the agenda is being kind of turned upside down. So what I'm trying to say here is that um, these interests, individual interests within block of power, have to be somehow harmonized with an ideals of fighting peace, finding peace in the DRC as a real strategy to resolve economic stability in the whole Africa, in the region as well. So, what I'm trying to say here is each countries have their own grievances. I've just said about what Burundi grievances are. Rwanda has grievances that there is a problem of security, that its regime is will be really threatened by FDLR rebellions in Congo, or by Burundian government or Congolese government. So each country have their own grievances, and these are in conflict of solution to find a peace in the DRC. And we are not talking about minerals as also an interest as an interest for countries such as South Africa, which really why they have been involved in the DRC. And all those interests, individual interests, personal interest, private interest of these actors conflict with whether we can find a solution in the DRC. And the Congo is part of such conflict of interest.
Thank you so much, Alex, for that well thought of answer, explaining how each country in Africa, the neighboring countries specifically, are responsible for peace building in the region. I'll pass the question on to George. You can also answer the same question, and then after George, we can have Honorable Dr. Mbide answer it as well.
Thank you, Grace. I think my attempt to respond to your question, Grace, is going to be focused on two aspects. One, I'm going to look into the inward issues in Democratic Republic of the Congo. And I was just looking, and if you look at the time period, you will realize that Congo has been almost unstable and experiencing all kinds of political upheaval for the last 60 years. And it's almost like a generation has passed, and yet finding a country with still in experiencing conflict and issues. And those internal conflict or the internal issues that Congo has experienced from the beginning, from the time of its independence up to now, are almost like a 4 or 5 forwards. One, it's issue of authoritarian regimes that comes in and imposing just their own ways of leadership and despising completely the strengthening the institutions and also the establishing rule of law. And that has been characterizing the country for the last 60 years. And the other thing, you look at the corruption that has completely destroyed the fabric of the society, or with that at the high level, local level, the corruption has completely destroyed everything that any country can rely on in terms of building peace and also building any other economic initiatives. The other thing is the misuse of public funds, and this is also something that has characterized the Congo for many years now. And of course, the exploitation of what Dr. Mvuka was talking about, the exploitation of a colonial legacy of divisions and the way the country was shaped prior to the colonialism has been exploded into like kind of completely destroying the fabric of a unity within a country and exploiting divisions that has been there for a very long time. So now, if you look at the external factors, or how now we're talking about the key players, regional players, international players, that's another thing that we have to look at. So when I look in a way, look at the lenses of bringing peace in DRC Congo, the government or the governance a strong governance has to be established. When we're talking about the strong governance, we're talking about the governance that respected the rule of law, that the governance that really focused on proper use of public funds, the government that focused on meeting the needs of the population. We're talking about the governance that is able to protect the territorial integrity of the country, the government that is also able to play diplomacy at a higher level and knowing what other regional powers has as an influence to the country. Those things have been lacking from day one, from the time of the independence, and we're not seeing any sign of progress toward understanding the whole dynamics of good governance. And it's an issue that we need to be fixed right away. If it's not, and this conflict can go on for many years to come. And so now, I'm whenever I talk as an activist or somebody who's trying to promote peace and reconciliation, I go back and look where things started. Somebody slightly mentioned about the Mobutu dictatorship that started in 1965 and went on until 1997. And when the first war started in the DRC, the characteristic of the power of Mobutu was nothing but just a nightmare for the population. And I grieve every time that I see that a Congolese person, a Congolese citizen, has to rely on humanitarian aid or some sort of aids coming from outside the country, where we're sitting in a land that is completely full of all kinds of potentials. If you look at the resources that you find in Congo, can never be found anywhere else. In fact, there have been some researchers that have proven that the natural resources reserve are up to $24 trillion. That's unheard of amount of resources that you find under the ground of the Republic of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And if you look at the rainforest, if you look at the biodiversity, if you look at all kinds of resources, you find them there. But yet, something that grieves me is to find that 73% of the Congolese citizens lives under the line of poverty, meaning they literally live by $2.75 a day. And but if you look the elites resources they have been acquiring because of the corruption and all other misuse of the public funds, it's unheard of. And so those are the ones that the some of the internal issues that need to be fixed. And those can be fixed by just establishing a government that is responsible, able to understand the needs of the population and trying to meet them forehead without necessarily waiting for the external other external regions or the other countries to come and fix those issues. Now, let's look outside. If you look outside, you see the issues of all the arms group that are now present in Democratic Republic of the Congo. You can start from 1994 when the former Rwandan army, after failing the war in Rwanda, moved to Congo, and the history has that over 2 million people fled from Rwanda to Congo, and those were almost another government operating within the country. The failure of the Congolese government to properly handle the issues of refugees that were not only refugees, regular refugees, of course, there was regular refugees, but also some of the genocide perpetrators who had moved to Congo. And the Congolese government entertained the idea that these people can be helped and coming back to Rwanda. And that's the one of the issues that has never been fixed. And we're still talking about it now, 30 years later. So when I'm looking at those issues, and if the Congolese itself, government can do what the auto-examination and looking themselves and seeing those issues that have been lingering around and never been fixed, and if they can start addressing them, I think they will cut a chunk of the conflict down to almost like to 10%, and the rest can be just dealt by the regional power that can come together and start finding ways of getting all the militias group internationally and locally out of the country so that they can be starting building lasting peace. I grieve over the fact that Congo has never been stable, knowing the potential that is there. You're talking about 110 million people that live in Congo. They're all very intellectual, able, and they also I'd like to believe there are people who can handle those conflicts rather than just waiting for the external countries to come and solve the problem. Somebody mentioned about the fact that MONUSCO has been there for decades now. It's failed over and over to address the issue, the real cause of the conflict, and what is it going to be there, and how many years it can be there to solve even one single problem of just protecting regular citizens who are being killed due to the conflict in the Congo. I can go on and I get passionate when I'm talking about just see the missed opportunities of the Congolese government, the missed opportunities of even the Congolese themselves, the Congolese citizens themselves, who have failed to realize that it's because of bad governance that has been there for decades that they are not able to live like any other citizens. In fact, they can live better than any other citizen around the world because they have all it takes. The God has afforded them with all resources, like any other countries around the world. So they should not suffer. And I grieve to see that people are suffering because just like politics and people who are entertaining the conflict as a ways of maintaining their power and ignoring the real cause of the conflict. And this has been going on for a very long time. And I think it's about time that it has to stop.
George, thank you so much for that very well-rounded, thoughtful answer to the response. I think there's a lot to reflect on issues that you touched on there, and we'll come back to those. For now, we're going to go to Dr. Mukasa Bide, and you can also answer the question. After he takes the question, I'll give the panelists one more question, and then we'll be able to take in requests from the audience.
Yeah, thank you very much. One thing that worries me is that the problems in Congo are majorly escalated and can be solved by one major thing, and that is the goodwill by the leaders of Congo. To the extent that the goodwill itself now predetermines the kind of friends that Congo should associate themselves with. It must be that kind of camaraderie that is pointing towards better solutions to the problems in Congo than actually those fermenting flames of disunity and the escalation of war in the Congo itself. Why do I say this? When you look at Congo, and some of my colleagues have also pointed it out, one of almost the wealthiest countries in terms of mineral-rich, largest reserves of precious minerals almost in the whole world. Why is it the country where you are looking at less than 10% of the Congolese operating a bank account? It puzzles me that the leaders of the Democratic Republic of Congo themselves find it important, palatable, and almost the only method of solving problems between the Congolese themselves by developing what we would call developing brigades and establishing mercenary connections between the country's army and probably the FDLR, and that when you are making choices of friends to work with in solving problems in your own country, you again look for countries that are actually available as to give mercenary support towards escalating the problem other than solving it. We have been doing. I have been observing, for example, the operations of Burundi, which seemingly is now retreating. Is seemingly retreating, and clearly simply because of the methods that the M23 has been utilizing. When you look at how the militias that are operating and are being strengthened within the DRC to conduct their own operations. They are choreographed almost in similar terms and coached in similar terms with the militias that have existed. For example, the Imbonerakures in Burundi, the way they have been participating in politics and also establishing a robust estoppel of the people of Burundi into participation in their own politics freely. They are almost akin to the Green Brigades that had existed in Zimbabwe. Those that had existed, the Tigers that had grown, for example, in South Sudan. You look at them and you see, how do you unleash such militias against your own people that, in your opinion, of course, might not be your people simply because they have got differences in terms of which language they speak, that they can have roots beyond the borders, but citizens of your own country? The legal regimes established between the 1960s, 1972, 1981, 1991, 1993 had attempted to destabilize, but at least maintain the status quo in terms of the law on citizenship in the country. But governance is itself a major source of cataclysm amongst the people. So in my opinion, goodwill and the operations of the leaders of Congo DRC should themselves be checked succinctly. Why do I say so? Burundi participated. It only had encircled it. Split up into 3 prongs, including one, of course, which went through Uvira, facing Bujumbura. That is when now Burundi decided to chicken out. But what are the roles that it is playing? Which kind of roles are those? In my opinion, when you look at what SADC has been doing, May 2023, they had authorized almost 1,300 troops. Okay, Malawi withdrew. Tanzania also has now remained a bridge builder. I think we are having better leadership in Tanzania now, other than the other leaderships that we had, that we are fermenting cataclysm instead. Then Shekedi runs up and down requesting, Chad requesting, vending mineral interests of his own country to other people in exchange for capacity to fight his own people in his own country. I think there is goodwill that is required. Goodwill is required. The Nairobi sitting, President Shekedi refused to attend. Then the Dar es Salaam sitting between SADC and EAC, then the President of Burundi refuses to attend. And you see, there are no clear reasons that are given for such refusal. They are majorly just, these are just signs of inability. They wanted to make sure that the processes established between the EAC SADC are rendered inoperable. Why? Because the only processes preferred by President Shekedi are the processes that, in his opinion, are geared towards stopping, ending the war, and probably annihilating the M23. These are Congolese children that are also fighting to make sure the country gets better in their own explanations and in their own interests. So for me, I have a feeling that we need to make sure that Congo gets back, that the leaders also adopt a system where they are interested in having solutions given, or else we are now looking at scenarios that are most likely going to ensue. The UN resolution of February 21st, 2025, that one doesn't go well. The African Union resolution is condemning M23. They are not solutions at all. Those cannot work. Otherwise, the scenarios that are most likely going to be established shall include the military administration of the Kivus, or a walk to Kinshasa, or a protracted regional war, almost which will be war number 2 between DRC and the SADC allies versus Uganda and Rwanda. Because we will not, first of all, we are the We are the consumers of refugee supplies from the Congo DRC. That is something that needed to be, and instead of being thanked, we are actually being targeted as if we are the fermenters of problems in the Eastern DRC. So we need to look at the historicity. Now, those that are now occasioning as penny holders decisions against the countries that are neighboring DRC are instead the historical causes for the problems that exist in the DRC. So, in my opinion, I think we need to look fixedly at how the leaders must, by way of wanting to ameliorate the armed problems within the Congo DRC, adopt the goodwill principle that they must also be looking forward to having solutions given. Those fighting are Congolese with former agreements that had been run away from by government. And accordingly, those are not agreements where you can accuse any of the neighboring countries for having fermented a problem or two. Number two, when you start harboring the ADF, for example, Uganda will sign an agreement for hot pursuit of the ADF. But what happens if you reject such signing of agreement, such access? Then Uganda will be at liberty. We'll have no choice but to make sure there must be processes through which we can be able to reach out and pick them. So if you begin harboring the FDLR, Rwanda equally needs the same process. If you now work and act in such a way that such processes are a logical impossibility, now the solution of FDLR to Rwanda becomes a complete enigma that must be solved by way of also establishing proper processes of defense that, in my opinion, might not be in the interest of government if government is not interested in having such problems solved. So Congo should know that because it has some mineral, it is a mineral-rich country, for example, probably it does not have the capacity to deal with the interests available in its own country. The Congolese president makes steps that are actually longer than his own feet. And that is something that he needs to be put to be stopped. He must also now understand that leadership includes, among others, your ability to talk to even those that you don't like. It must be your ability to solve problems that you do not believe are actually personal to holder. The president of the Republic of Congo needs to understand that the solution of the problems of DRC lie with Africa and, most importantly, close proximity with the EAC and the neighboring countries, and those countries with which the Congo shares borders. In my opinion, that is something, because when you look at the history of the operations of government is to such an extent that it has now strengthened, ideally, the wrong politics that has been ethnicized between the leaders. When you look at the governor of Kivu, the former, the one of Kalumbe, the speeches that had been made in support of the Hunde, the Nyanga, and the killing of the Banyarwanda very long ago, the narratives have been continued up to the current government. And for me, in my opinion, the constitution of the Republic of Congo, DRC, of 1960 had solved a lot of problems with extra care. If it was not for the bad politics, as my brother has also clearly adumbrated, that ensued afterwards, this has to be solved. And if it is not solved by way, of course, of holding meetings and having a consensus built, then the fighting forces must now be given the green light. Because when you look at what they are doing now, establishing leadership and answering questions of bad leadership in the areas of the Kivus that are being controlled by the alliance, in my opinion, they are beginning to even pose better leadership capacities, better than the substantive government that is actually leading Kinshasa. I think that has got to be looked at if solutions are to ensue for the problems within DRC.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mbide, for your answer to that question. And I think it's important for all of us to acknowledge that, you know, at the heart of these conversations that we do have are real people, citizens whose lives are deeply affected by, you know, the conflict. And, you know, while we talk about state sovereignty, international law, and governance, every decision that's made and every intervention that's attempted affects real people. So, you know, I just want us to shift our focus for the last 15 minutes before we go into the Q&A, because we'll be at our half hour, no, at our 30-minute mark for the our space today, and then we'll take questions. So for the last question that I have for the panelists before we take questions from the audience is, um, you know, it is crucial to remember that peace does not come from a top-down approach. It's built by citizens, communities, and I like to believe that, you know, the solutions always come from the people. And if you're a leader, you should always, you know, talk to your people. They know what they want and they know what they need, right? And yeah, so it's built by citizens, communities, and nations coming together. So, in your view, how can we mobilize citizens both within the DRC and across, you know, the global community to embrace this shared responsibility for peace and create an environment where Congo is able to thrive, where Congo is able to live up to its full potential that we all know that it has. Yeah, so I would invite George to answer this first, and then I'll pass it on to Alex. And I just ask, because we're at 5:17 right now, I want us to wrap up this part by 5:30 so that we have enough time for the audience. So just try. I know it's a very loaded question, but try to keep your answer at 2 minutes, so that we can have the last 30 minutes for the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace, for the question. And I think it should be the focus of this conversation, because we can talk all day long about the issues, but if we don't end up coming up with some sort of propositions for this peace and solution of the issues, and then our conversation will be void. And so to your question, I'm going to go straight forward. I totally agree with you that peace does not come from top down. It has to come from bottom up. And meaning it got to be built from the people themselves. Because if you look at the history, all these years of loss, years of missed opportunities, and children who are dying with hunger, and also uneducated kids who are becoming the warlords, and that's a cycle that need to be break, and it can only be broken by promoting a really space of truth telling and acknowledgement of past injustices, and also and showing that those are essential for true healing of wounds that have been inflicted upon the citizen for many years. And we have not seen such a thing in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where people are convened and talk through all this horrific history of conflict and wars and all other pains that have been inflicted upon so many millions of people in Democratic Republic of the Congo. So you're talking about millions of people have died as a result of the conflict. So I think the first thing that needs to be done, and this can be, of course, fostered by the government and also the regional powers, and bringing people together and really encouraging people to talk and find some solution. The other thing is that dialogue, the initiatives that need to be promoted. And that's one thing that I think that diaspora can be also a part of this, by promoting the local dialogues and where people, community members who've been in the conflict for the very long time can sit together and start finding solution. And this is something that I think within our reach. But of course, it has to be conducive, you know, initiatives that are promoting that kind of talk and the local initiative that just bring people together and talk. And one thing I that really pains me, concerns me, is the silence of the what that goes on when conflicts are happening. And Grace, you probably very young, but we grew up in the Congo when the whole thing was bubbling, and you could tell that the end was not going to be good. But if you look at the religious leaders who've been quite in face of the injustice that are being portrayed to some group of people, and they think it's good for the community, for the country, but it's not. And those that has to be ways of involving all every I mean, involving different sectors of the population, religious leaders, political leaders at the local level, but also the community members and leaders, and try to bring awareness of what took place in Democratic Republic of the Congo, and just showing case that it can no longer going on for other many years, because we know the result of the conflict. It's a dying, it's a I mean, the people suffering with starvation, internal displacement and external displacement, and people I think are being fed up with those things, and there have to be a starting point, draw a line, a baseline of starting solving issues. And I think if we start by hosting those groups and at local level, also at the international level, the solution can come from there. And I'm not naive in knowing that there's also other factors that need to be addressed, but those that could be the foundation of finding lasting peace in Democratic Republic of the Congo. So I can go on, but I just want to give it time for other people to comment. Thank you. Hey, Gracie, are you there? Hello? Hello?
Hey, Tantin, do you hear me, Grace? So I think we missed Grace. Try to connect her. Let me see. Try
Were
to
you
connect
at
Grace
least able
again.
to hear me? My comments were they heard?
Do you hear me, George?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm try to connect Grace. I think. Just give me a second. Yeah, I think we lost Grace. We can continue. I think it was time for the audience. I think anybody who is who need to ask a question, you can raise your hand. You can request the mic. So we are ready. We're gonna have a couple of two, three people. So yeah, let me
I
let
think
me
I
connect.
think there was a question asked regarding the role of Congolese, which speakers were supposed to kind of intervene on that.
Oh yeah. Oh okay. Yeah. Uh, so let me. Tanti, Grace,
I don't know
Grace, are you?
if we still have
Yeah, yeah,
if we
yeah.
still have time, but no.
Was my comment heard at least? Because
Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we heard
okay,
you.
Yeah, go ahead.
no, I had. If you heard me, then I was almost done. Okay.
Oh, okay. All right. So
Yeah.
we are waiting to see if the audience. We need two, three people from the audience, so we can wrap up with the space. So we have like 10 minutes remaining. Yeah. So we are still waiting, Grace, to connect. We are still waiting. I see a lot of comrades here. I see Dr. Ismail. You are welcome. I see Damir. I see a lot of people here in the audience. Please, you are welcome. So let me give some audience the mic, and so we can have 2 or 3 questions. Grace, I'm waiting for you. So if you can connect yourself, and yeah. Muhezi, I saw you. Let me give you a mic because I think it was the first one. Muhezi, are you there?
Yes, please, I'm around.
Yeah, mic is yours.
Yes, please. Now, good evening to you all. I've heard and I've loved this. My concern and which is the major cause of this conflict is why can't DRC and her president accept to be an independent, think on her own, and decide according to suggestions of its family? The family I'm talking about are the states within Africa. Why can't the president of DRC believe and move with an ideological principle of Pan-Africanism? Why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this because the president of DRC has surely shown us that for him, he really wants mercenaries in his country. Why all those mercenaries in his country? Why would you deploy all those mercenaries to fight your own people in your country? Why would this president of DRC accept mercenaries from Europe, North America, South Africa? Imagine coming inside, deep inside his own country to fight his own people. Why would you go out of your family to go and bring a person who should come and fight your children because because you people have got a misunderstanding within a family? Why would you? And tomorrow, when you know that these mercenaries, the moment they endanger your family people, you are the one who is suffering from that loss. If you really love your people, why would you bring such? Because the way they will be treating them in the name of disciplining them won't be the same as how you people can sit on the round table and discuss issues and see the meeting point you can get, which is peaceful. The major problem is total lack of Pan-Africanism spirit within the state of DRC and the president of DRC. We need to get rid of all the mercenaries within DRC. Apart from this, we shall talk and talk, we shall die, and DRC will remain with all these problems.
Excuse me, Muhwezi. Sorry to interrupt you. I just request that for our Q&A, you keep it at 1 minute, and you state your question and who you're directing it to, for the sake of time purposes.
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. What were you saying?
Yeah, I was saying that for our questions, we're going to keep it at 1 minute, the question that you're asking, and I need it to be straightforward, and tell us who you're addressing the question to and ask your question.
Okay. My name is Muhwezi Abubakar from Uganda and from Patriotic Village of Uganda. My question is, Why can't DRC and the president of DRC accept to decide on its self as a country as far as its nation's issues are concerned? For example, why would it accept mercenaries within its country? Why would it accept mercenaries to come in its country to fight its own people? The second
Thank you for
question.
your question. Oh, sorry, we're just gonna keep it at one for now, for time purposes, and then we'll come back to you if we still have time. And who are you directing your question to?
My question goes back to George.
Okay, George, you can go ahead and answer him.
Yeah, that's a question that is very hard to respond, but I'll try my best. So your question was, why would the president of DRC accept Pan-Africanism or even bring mercenaries into his country to fight the citizens of Congo? And I think I will go back to what I said about the lack of good governance in Democratic Republic of the Congo, and I like what somebody said about the lack of goodwill for solving the real issues and scapegoating the issues to other people, to neighboring countries, or anybody else. I think the fact that I'd like to see that. I mean, the real issue is that there are no uh, people who are able to defend the integrity of the territory in Democratic Republic of Congo. It been always the issues that every time there's an issue, he has to seek out the help from outside, and that's a real problem. And that one of the issues is because the army, the Congolese army, is completely unable to defend the territory of the country in terms of protecting the borders. Hence why we find so many militias from outside the Congo coming and finding places, territory there, and killing people and doing all kinds of evil things there. So the problem is we gotta push the will of the Congolese leaders, and I really think it's about time where we gotta induce their will to solve the real problems rather than defecting or defaulting into the help from outside. And it's proven that they cannot defend the country. Therefore, at the end of the day, it's Congolese themselves have to stand and defend the territory of their own country. And if they are unable to do that, and I don't see anybody who's going to do that on their behalf. So that's just probably the vague way of responding to the question, but it's very hard to know why. But I think it's because just they think their problems are going to be solved by somebody else and not themselves.
Thank you, George, for that answer. I'm just wondering if Alex or Dr. Mbide would like to add to that as well before we take another question.
Grace, really, this is not just Tshisekedi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, it is. I fully agree with George. It is a question of governance. The DRC has been really dependent on others to solve their own problem, and it started from really 60s. I'm not going to take much of your time, but during Mulalis's rebellion, uh, the DRC had to seek some mercenaries, people such as John Scrum, who ended up having to take over city of Bukavu because there was no paid. There was another war in 1977, which called the Six-Day War, La Guerre de Six Jours in Katanga. Again, at that time they kind of all had to seek intervention from other countries, Libya, Chad, and many other countries. Same as during similar times with the Belgian mercenaries, French mercenaries. In 1998, there was SADC. About 12 countries were involved. There is really this existing culture of importing solutions, and really involving paying for quick solutions, because you are not really able to build your own army to be strong enough. Once you have a problem, you don't know what to do because you don't have an army, because you've been, institutions are so corrupted, resources are really kind of looted, and then you have to get rid of an issue, and that's how DRC often is it really part of a corruption, is part of a bad governance, is part of a finding quick solutions, is part of a relying on externals, and it's part of a weak state, almost kind of a lawless type of state, where you are involving some kind of no state actors to address your own conflict. I think that's probably what I can add to what has been said.
Grace, just quick
Mm-hmm.
element into it. So the corruption in Democratic Republic of the Congo has affected almost all the sectors around, and it's not just into the government, but also in the military. So it is believed that, and probably Alex, as an expert, can correct me if I'm wrong, that Congo has almost 160,000 troops. That's the size of the Congolese army. But because they were recently, I heard the comments about how come the largest army in Africa probably is unable to defend the Congolese territory, and that's because the corruption that is within the army, the army that is not well paid, not well trained, and also some of them are fictive numbers. So it's just corruption within itself, completely unable to stand any aggression, and so it's just nightmare, but also unfortunate that the Congo as a country has no strong army that is able to do the work, protecting citizens' properties and protect lives of citizens, but also the territory, the integrity of the territory.
Thank you for that. I also think that it's something that I also want to add to this point is the fact that there's no sense of responsibility on the part of the government. They have not they have not owned up to a lot of the many situations that go on in the region, and it's always finger pointing at other issues outside of what is happening within Congo. And I also do think it's important, in order for the country to make any sort of like real progress, is to acknowledge where the issue is. And a lot of the things that we do see today are very, very could have been avoidable, to some extent, but there's no sense of responsibility. There's no like Dr. Mbita said, there has to be some sense of goodwill on their part as well, and that's very lacking. I'm gonna pass it on to Billy. You can ask your question. Just a reminder that you keep your question at 1 minute, and you let us know who you're directing your question to, or if it's to all the speakers, and then the speaker will take the mic.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tantine. You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much, One Nation, for organizing this space. My question will go back to George. We've seen how Chisegeti is offering his minerals to USA, and my question, I think, I want to ask if America is going to accept that offer from Chisegeti, because this problem of the root cause of the conflict in DRC has been addressed very well by Mwalimu. He addressed this route very well, but the Western power has
has downplayed it. They don't want to just they pretending that they don't know the root cause of this problem. We've seen how they sanction Rwanda. We've seen how they behave in this issue, and we've seen how Tshisekedi is offering his minerals to USA. My question to George is: America is going to accept that offer from Tshisekedi? America is going to accept uh, uh, to kill the population of to kill the Congolese, because those who are fighting are Congolese. America is going to do to kill Congolese. That's my question. Thank you.
That's a very hard question. If the Americans going to accept the offer uh, from the Congolese president, that's something that I'm not sure how to respond to it. But maybe what I know for sure is that the American is a very, very sophisticated country, and before they take any offer, they look all the parameters of the offer, and they will see if there's any interest. First of all, you have to understand that America is countries that operate mostly on what is good for the country, but also, of course, what is good for the world. I would like to believe that this is something that is going to be clearly assessed and see if there has any tangible reason of taking the offer. But without knowing what the element of the offer was, I have not seen the offer they were used to reach out to the U.S. government. But at the same time, I think we, the people, has to advocate for what is good for the nation, what is good for the region, and the mineral cannot be, cannot replace people, and I think that's the role of a grassroots movement to advocate and showcase that it's about time to sit down and address the root causes of the conflict rather than just playing the game of offering and taking without taking into consideration what is good for the citizens of Democratic Republic of the Congo.
I think.
Oh, go
Can I
ahead, Alex. Yep.
just to say the question is really really important because it isn't rumor. There have been exploratory talks between US and the DRC. Really very specific in the sense that it is seeking military support. It is an exchange of military support. What I see is that the U.S. is very is under new leadership. Trump is very unpredictable, but very pragmatic in sense that the DRC government has been very not reliable in so many deals. And I think that's a specific conditions of military support is itself questionable. So it is something to watch. It is, eh, of course, there is big interest for the for the US, especially ensuring that other big powers are not influencing the market. But I think it is important to understand that Tshisekedi has been so unreliable with so many other deals, and for U.S. Diplomatic approach, it is really some kind of a government that can be able to deal with them in and be able to pursue such a deal. And they don't see the kind of at the moment they don't see the DRC government as a strong partner in pursuing such kind of a partnership based on minerals. Um, I think China is watching this very carefully. It is already inside. It has been really playing a big role. It isn't something that can change over a night. There are some legal implications in terms of changing existing contract to new partner. The biggest really project to look at is the Lobito project. again, is a long-term type of project that itself will satisfy US if it can be successful. It involve Angola, involve the DRC, but when they look at what they call l'environnement des affaires, business environment, um, many partners will have to look at, do a political economy analysis and understand whether DRC institutions are strong enough to enter in such kind of deals. That's what I can see. Is it something to watch? But it is not as as something that can be done overnight.
Yeah, and just one element on top of what so this, I don't know if you know that I think it was yesterday or the day before that Trump appointed somebody called Masad Boulos as a special envoy for the Great Lakes region of Central Africa, and right now they are going through the clearance, and after that he will be sent to Congo, but also to Rwanda, and I think those are the probably the opportunity to see the things, how things are on the ground, and also talking to different key players and stakeholders, and from that, I think there'll be good education, or it's going to educate or inform the interests of the United States if that's something they can do or not do. Just one information that I want to put out there.
Billy, I hope that answers your question well. I'm going to try to bring up Dr. Bida up again. Okay, he's back. Is there anything you would like to add to the two questions? He was having technical issues, so we're just going to give him 3 minutes to add to the conversation if he would like to say something.
Thank you very much. Quickly, also to add, at the coming in of the Trump administration, obviously there were questions on, particularly because of their need for coltans and some other minerals. There was a question of how best they're going to relate and access the minerals in Congo. And part of the decisions that had taken place had been given were to prioritize relations, alliances, and of course that meant that they were going to make strategic connections and contacts between Uganda and Rwanda for purposes of accessing the same. In their opinion, it was strategic because they had the controlling effect on the security situation in the country. Today, of course, Tshisekedi is moving up and down in order to make sure that his government becomes, of course, the choice of partnership in that regard. What the African countries need to know is that this can only be done better when we ourselves source for markets, source for alliances, source for partnerships, and therefore determine the prices for which we are doing sales of all those resources that are for our own countries. If we never do the same, then obviously we are failing to get to the point where our people will begin to think we are still leaders of these countries. Of course, there has been very serious mention on the Congolese army. It is very appalling because this is an army that is almost ranked number 73rd of the 145 of the countries considered for the Global Firepower Review. And that, of course, has something to do with the quantity of the military units and logistical capabilities. But due to corruption, obviously, it cannot fight. You can imagine that the level and the degree of competence. You remember the other time when Major General Floribert Kisembo was appointed the new head of military operations in North Equator province, only to be told, the president to be told that actually Kisembo had died almost 10 years ago. So that points to very grave incompetence. So the questions that actually came up of what choices must be made if we are to have, of course, fundamental solutions for the problems in Congo. Because when we are looking at this Congo, we are looking at majorly now the areas served by cities of Bukavu, Bunia, Goma, Kisangani, and Uvira. So what do we need to do? There needs to be, of course, an involvement of mindset initiatives. The problem is that the best mindset to target first now are the mindsets of leaders. So there must be an initiative for mindset change before we even get into the truth and reconciliation of commissions of some sort. There must be, of course, good governance. And when we talk of good governance, then Africans begin to scramble for elections. Good governance can only be determined in accordance to results. Result oriented, not elections and that kind of celebrity panjandrum activities where some people are declared winners at 99%. And we have had the constitutions, we have had elections. Constitution is provided for all power belongs to the people. But you wonder, we had a national party, for example, in the former Zaire, headed by the late Mobutu, that would obtain results close to 99%. The constitution was almost also flowery, where it is determined that all power belongs to the people. But when the guy was removed, you found that everybody now ran to the streets in jubilation. We had the same type of constitution in Sierra Leone. But when the countrymen and women deposed the government, people went to the streets. We had what? So Libya had declared the Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. And of course, the president had declared that he had actually left power after 2 years and that the people are themselves leading. Governance, good governance, is in accordance to results and not elections. So what we need in that area are not a series and a multiplicity of elections, but good governance where we are establishing robust infrastructure, road connectivities, and result-oriented decisions taken place. Zero tolerance to corruption, and of course, government efficiency. If we entertain such, if we go ahead and do the same, you will see that Congo is going to become a peaceful country. I am very worried. It is almost becoming late. It is becoming like a bicycle for anybody to begin to think that actually Congo will include these areas I have mentioned, led under Kinshasa. We are most likely going to be seeing further and better, more support. Robust support is tending towards now the establishment of another solution, the same way the solution became for the establishment and the creation of the Republic of South Sudan. People may reach the extent of thinking that I think because the government has failed to answer the questions that we pose, has failed to answer the fundamental question of the right to life by the people of Eastern Congo, it is going to begin to become one single solution, and that is to take the place of government. Either as Eastern Congo becoming a country of its own, or as the fighters and the revolutionaries also now taking power in order to answer gravely these questions of fundamental right to life and human dignity. Because these are very serious issues and we must be succinct. We have reached a state where, according to government officials, sense now no longer makes sense. And where you get to such a level of a government or a leader of government beginning to vend the possibility of presence of resources to other countries to access the same, not for the betterment of the country, but for purposes that he can defeat his countrymen that he calls enemies. In my opinion, then, there is most likely going to be further decisions that should be made by the people in a revolutionary spirit to establish their own secession and form countries that can answer their own questions.
Thank you, Dr. Mbito, for that answer. So we do have 6 minutes left on the clock, so I will give one more person. Where did he go? Oh yeah, Vata Ringaya Kenneth. You can ask a question for a minute. We do have 6 minutes on the clock left, so just be mindful of that and let us know who you're directing your question to.
Okay, thank you. I'll first of all thank the panel for organizing this space and also the organizers themselves. So my name is Kato Kenneth Wataringa. I'm from Uganda. I'll try and be as brief as possible. Alex tried and outlined the problems underlining the Congo, the DRC problem, and he mentioned the ethnic politics and other problems. Then Dr. Honorable Mbide talked about something that was very interesting. That the point of what the problem is might not necessarily be what what it is presided to be. Meaning, we might view the problem in a different manner compared to the people in DRC do. Right. That brings me to my question. So, what? Okay, how or how how is the weight of the historical drives to this conflict compared to the contemporary drives to this conflict in DRC? How important are they, the two? Because when we were discussing, I felt like the contemporary conflicts, those are the most recent ones. Mostly the contemporary, I mean the political and the political incoherences and the militia problems in DRC being the most prominent ones. But there was also a historical problem at hand. So my question is, what is the weight of the historical drives of these conflicts compared to the contemporary ones? This question goes mainly to Alex and Honorable Mbide. How would you weigh these two, and how would you solving one of these lead to a peaceful Congo in relation to the topic that we are talking about?
Thank you. That's really fascinating observation. Um, I think responses we made today really were framed by the questions that were put forward. Maybe there wasn't enough time really to provide that kind of understanding of the root causes of conflict. In the DRC, when you look at ethnic conflict, which is really what the conflict is, is there today. Um, the historical, the current, they are all the same. The 1960s were nationalism revolution against Western power. At that time, it was a change of regime, just in post independence. There was a new government, which the America and the Belgium did not see as aligning with them. The, how somehow instigated internal conflict, but it became, it turned to be much more violent than probably expected. There was much more around the changing regime, changing the new government, but it turned to be a ethnic conflict, which was supposed to be a nationalism revolution. He found a hub again in Eastern Congo. At that time in South Kivu, there was something called the Mulelist Rebellion, which really was centered around the idea that Banyamulenge are not Congolese. These are Tutsis in South Kivu. In North Kivu, there was an internal conflict around. It's called Kanyarwanda. Was really a war between Rwandophones, Kinyarwanda speakers, and other communities, the larger communities such as the Nandes. At that time, really, the problem was in Kinshasa. People were kind of mobilizing around tribes to become an MP. And by mobilizing people around tribes to become an MP, to become a member of parliament, then really, of course, you turn the community against one another. So in North Kivu, Nandi communities being kind of one of the largest, became feeling that they are under threat of the Kinyarwanda speakers. That became something really manipulated and instrumentalized by the regime at that time in Kinshasa. So that is historical. So that it was supposed to be a revolution against Western powers, Western hegemony, capitalism and socialism. Che Guevara was involved. That was he had to withdraw from the DRC because he realized these people have not understood the revolution. So I'm trying to give you kind of an idea of how the past and the present are same. Well, 1990s, same. It was a rhetoric around ethnocentrism, Mobutu feeling that he's under threat of he's no longer liked by America, he's no longer liked by Europe, and what he felt that will probably mobilize some sort of attention was to say, well, we will need to kick out the Tutsis. By the way, people might say, well, that's a kind of some kind of these people are kind of self-victimizing themselves. No, in Congo there is this phenomenon. The only thing that unite people is hatred against the Tutsi people. So if you are playing politics or populism, that is really an amazing resource. So toward mid 90s, it became a slogan at the national parliament to say, look, we need to come up with the legislations that will allow us to know between these Rwandophones, people speaking in Rwanda, Hutu and Tutsis, whether they are Congolese enough. That became a rhetoric that really mobilized people in the country. And I'm saying this by involving the population. The civil society in Congo is also part of such rhetoric. So really, they have not kind of a fight against such ideas that government government in Kinshasa have been kind of instigating. So moving back to today, the last few years, so last 30 years, I would say, the wars have been often starting around the same issues. And since Rwanda became Rwanda of today in 1994, more than a million people fled to that country, and some were armed. The first war, Rwanda were involved really because they were feeling it wasn't because of sympathy of Tutsis in Congo. It wasn't about that. It was because they were feeling that they're under threat of the former genocidaire who fled to the DRC. Same as Uganda. At that time, Uganda, living next to a country that is stateless, is lawless, well, kind of a feeling that this country, we have ADF mobilizing against the government. So there have been always a security issue by the neighbors. Hence why there are foreign armed groups in the DRC, ADF, FDLR, Red Tabara, Forebu, so many Burundian and Rwandan and Ugandan armed groups in Congo. And those countries, yes, of course, they have economic interest and a trade interest, but I don't think those one would be priorities. Personally, in my own analysis, I do see security threat simply because DRC is ungovernable. So today, M23 mobilized again around their own people who fled. They are in Uganda in 100,000. They are in Rwanda in 100,000. They have been removed from their own homes simply with the idea that they are not Congolese enough. So the war anywhere else has been around tribal. In Congo Central has been Yaka and Yeke is all about tribal, territorial identities. So this group say, well, you should not belong in this province. Let's say in Uganda context, people in Toro mobilizing to say, well, people from Mbale, you cannot be here in Toro. You should go to Mbale. People in Mbale should say, well, Toro people, you should not be here. In Portofото, you go back to Portofото. So this is a rhetoric that exists in the DRC. And so M23 has mobilized around those issues. Yes, of course. The ideas of armed groups in DRC has become itself an economic of war, a war economy, sorry. Um, since the peace process tend to bring rebellions into some kind of lucrative positions or power, somehow many people have felt that starting armed groups is really in a way to access politics. And for politicians as well, owning armed groups has become a way to influence politics. You have to be someone who can speak well. If you can speak well, you have to be someone who has who coming from a big tribe that can have electoral base. If you can't be that, you have to to be someone who own an armed group. So that is a serious issue of lack of authority, of a governance authority to be able to address those issues. So there is no past and present. The present and past are all the same. It is a lack of a government that can actually stand in the middle and say, look, it isn't your responsibility, you Babembe people, you Nande people, you I don't know, Lendu people. It isn't in your responsibility to decide who is Congolese, who's not. We have ministry of interior ministry that looked after who comes in the country, who goes out. We are responsible to know who is foreign, who's not. But in Congo, every tribe can stand and say you are not Congolese. Every tribe, any tribe, and that is almost like it's a banana republic. What sort of a country that can let its own country, its own people, and you see rhetoric everywhere where people are kind of mobilizing against the other tribe to say they're no Congolese. And that has become almost an ideology. If you hate Tutsis or you hate Rwanda, anti-Rwandan ideology, it become a weapon for both the government and the political opposition. So to survive really politically in the DRC, it is imperative to put at the center of your philosophy such political, but such rhetoric. And to align, you have to align yourself with such ideology. Otherwise, you risk to lose elections. You risk to lose place. You risk to lose interest. And same as the international actors, they do avoid the questioning such practice for fear of really being kicked out or compromising their interests and influence in DRC. So, embassies, for example, when you see that they cannot point out on wrongdoings, for example, hate speech, for example, cannibalism and lynching of certain kind of people that the whole society has dehumanized. No one single embassy, no one single international NGO, that international organization can be able to do that, simply because it has become a political correctness. It is almost kind of like the opposite of anti-Semitism. In Europe, if you say something against a Holocaust, you will lose your job. In Congo, if you say something against the Tutsis, you get a job. You are promoted. You get elections. And if you say something opposite, you lose your job and you lose your embassy. That is the problem and has never changed. And other countries have been able to manage to do that. Even in Burundi, the poorest country in the world, have been able to overcome the Hutu and the Tutsi ethnicity inside the country, but they still feel it is relevant in the region. In Rwanda, they've been able to manage the issue of Hutu and Tutsi, and inside the country. I'm sure they are trying their best. They know that how serious a threat it is in the region as well. So if anyone, if any country, any government, anywhere outside DRC, want to resolve a problem in the DRC, it had to start with such issues. The only problem, interests of international actors, um, they don't really care about minorities, minority groups. Minority groups are only of interest to the international actors, to the world, if the oppressors is against their interest. In that case, they will say, well, you're killing your own people. They will trigger what they call responsibility to protect. Responsibility to protect is when, for example, in Gaddafi in Libya, They say, well, Gaddafi is killing his own people, therefore we have to remove him. They can trigger that sort of international law, where a country lose sovereignty, and you can no longer claim territorial integrity because you are not able to look after your own citizen. For the case of the DRC, that law doesn't apply because the interests of powers are still there, are still valid, they're still accessible. And why should they be talking about, minority groups being oppressed or persecuted? So that's a long answer. I'm sorry to show you that the past is not different to the present.
Thank you so much for Dr. Alex, and for wrapping it up on that note. It is important to remember that the past informs our present, and a lot of the way things are today are informed by a country's past. And with that being said, I want to thank our speakers today for your time and insight. I encourage our listeners to follow them on their X accounts to keep up with the works that they're doing. And also to follow Radio One, One Nation Radio, to be up to date with these conversations that we're going to be having. And at the end of, for those that joined, I'll just give like a brief summary of what we did talk about. This is part 2 of a series that we've been having on the conflict in Eastern Congo, and we established today that a peaceful and stable Congo is, not just important for the Congolese people; it will benefit all of Africa. And it's crucial to recognize one undeniable truth, and that's that the responsibility for the ongoing crisis lies primarily within the government. The failure to ensure security, provide effective governance, and to take real action has allowed the country to descend into the chaos that we see today. While regional and international support is important, it is the Congolese leadership that must take ownership of the nation's future, right? And for the audience, I'll let this conversation inspire, the urgency for change. A peaceful Congo will be a victory for all of Africa, and it's up to all of us internally and externally to make that vision a reality. Thank you again to One Nation Radio for hosting this discussion. We will be back next week, same time, with different speakers as we continue this series. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to our speakers. I don't know if they have any parting words. You can feel free to speak.
No, thank you, Grace, for this wonderful conversation. But I think one of the things we should all reflect on is just like a number of children who die as a result of the conflict, but the mass displacement of Congolese around the world, and the killing and the massacres and one of all the innocent people, and just government failure to address the corruption, the mismanagement of the public fund, the lack of leadership, fuel instability and suffering. So the resources exploitation of in the Congo, and humanitarian crisis and human right abuses that are happening in the Congo every day, and rapes. Those are the things that should inspire us to find a tangible solution or lasting peace. And we can all play a role into this process by doing what is good for the Congolese people and the Congo as a nation, and that is to find a really good governance there. And once it's there, and as somebody said, the lack of political will to address the real causes of issue is unbelievable, and it has to start somewhere. And I think we can all do our best to try to promote peace there, and by just speaking loud and also having these kinds of conversations. So I really salute you to hosting this Twitter space and hoping that people will learn from these experiences. Thank you.
Yes, I equally would like to make my parting shots. What I think African leaders need to understand is that after independence, when matters in the equation to be discussed are citizenship. So those are things that I think African leaders need to understand and pave the way for a mindset change within the populations. It must be the leaders to understand first before even it spreads to the populations, because that is clearly the movement that leaders use in order to now pit the multiplicity of ethnicities within the African settings and countries against each other for the benefit of those in terms of numbers that would like to have the so-called elections won by those African leaders. When you look at the principle of jus soli, it almost applied to all countries towards independence. The principle where you are born is where you are a citizen by birth. Now you see that African countries are struggling to re-explain that you can even have persons called the former refugees, and that they existed in a country before independence. Yet that was now a process of state formations, and that only those that choose to go elsewhere can choose to be citizens of those other countries they have gone to, but that those that choose to stay are actually citizens of those countries by birth once they are born in those countries. We are dealing with a lot of those things, and even explanations that we are making are also. Am I on?
Yeah, we can hear
Hello?
you. Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, in my opinion, I think African leaders need to style up. We are dealing with a few other things, even here in Uganda, and I think we need to resolve the contradiction. The historical question, the pre-independence questions were sorted. It is no longer a debate. The debate is about what we are doing today going forward. That is now the challenge before African leaders to solve this question of establishing sections of your own people as stateless must never exist in Africa if we are to avoid the problems of like those in Congo, DRC. Because the colleague that asked us, when you see what happened, what is happening now happened long ago. The 60s, it has been explained by my colleague. By 1931, one should explain why, for example, the Belgian administrator negotiated with the Bahunde Mwami an agreement that gave all of the sub-chiefs in the Masisi territory occupied by the Banyarwanda to their own Banyarwanda leaderships. That means it started quite long ago, and the solutions are actually clearly towards empowering and enfranchising the people. That is the best solution for their own problems. I think that is the best way we can move as East Africans and Africans.
Thank you, Dr. BJ.
I think for me,
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
just really quick point. I fully agree with the other speakers. I think one of the major challenges facing the DRC is the absence of a collective consciousness. Based on the fundamental values of respect for individual rights, justice, honesty, and humanism, values of inclusion. The African values of Ubuntu. I am who I am because of others. So that itself really should probably be a focus in a teaching in the DRC or in African societies. So African economic development and sustainable peace will really depend on how cohesive all our diverse rich identities actually. For other countries, um, people are source of economic development. If you are killing your own people, 100,000, 2,000, basically you are chopping off your own economy. I can say it in really straight way, in such a way. So today's DRC conflict is an obstacle to Africa's progress. But the solution would depend on African unity, African no feeling that they have to be constrained by the artificial borders carved up by by Western powers, and almost claiming some kind of territorial identities based on colonial ideas. So really, I argue for a mental decolonization, a mental decolonization. Decolonization of Africa will not start with Western powers or colonialists. It will start with Africans. They are fighting over imported concepts. They are fighting over imported identities. They are fighting over imported borders. And these are really leading to lack of unity, lack of cohesion, and therefore instability and conflict continue to dominate. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alex, and thank you to all the speakers for leaving us on a very good reflective note. And I just want to thank you again for agreeing to come speak today. And thank you to One Nation Radio as well for hosting this. We'll see you all next week, same time, same place. And have a great week, everyone, and a good evening or good morning wherever you are in the world. Goodbye.